Welcome to another fabulous episode of Furry Found Footage. I'm your host, the Dark Sorceress Orlina, and before I begin, I'd like to ask your consideration in the upcoming Ursa Major Awards. The Ursa Major Award is presented annually for excellence in the furry art by furry fans. It's basically the anthropomorphic equivalent of a Hugo. In order for Furry Found Footage to be eligible in the nonfiction category for voting, people have to visit the website linked in the description below. Simply input your email address to get an enrollment key, then log in and submit your nominations. I thank you deeply for your time. I'm back from Further Confusion 2024 this week, which is my home con. Unfortunately, I only got to attend for a few hours, but I debuted my Princess Orlina suit, who you may consider the good side of me. I had an absolute blast. If you took any photos of me, please let me know. In tonight's episode, I'm taking a look at Little Red Riding Hood, a TV movie from 1996 and something of a hidden gem. I first saw this about 10 years ago, and I've been singing its praises ever since. Without further ado, let's begin. This version of Little Red Riding Hood comes from director Donald Sturrock, who took the Little Red story from Roald Dahl's 1982 fairy tale parody poetry book entitled Revolting Rhymes and expanded it to a 44-minute running time. While the 2016 CGI adaptation of Revolting Rhymes was nominated for Best Animated Short Film at the 2018 Academy Awards, the 1990 animated storybook adaptation and the special I'm discussing tonight have been largely forgotten. And that's a travesty because 1996's Little Red Riding Hood, created for BBC documentary series Omnibus, features none other than Ian Holm on narration and Danny DeVito as the wolf. That's right, Danny DeVito. We also get a host of dancers and animal roles and Dame Julie Walters in the dual role of Little Red and Grandma. Please note, I'm going to spoil this movie, so if you'd like to watch it first, I've included a link in the description for your pleasure. Now, I'm sure most of you know the story of Little Red Riding Hood like the back of your hand. After a brief introduction, we're treated to filth-coated wild man Ian Holm pontificating on the idea of a forest. Also, he's very tiny. Apparently he's a min pin, which I always thought was a miniature Doberman pinscher. In this version, Little Red has no parents, but she does have a candy house in the woods with a spyglass and a yard full of, pets. Look at these sweet cuties. 3 cuddly lambkins, 2 dainty fawn twins. These fairly realistic heads on top of these pretty little costumes really give the film a dreamlike feel. The neighbors are the toothy sheep and drooling cow, as listed in the credits, and there's a, quote, Prussian sow who appears to be a procuress for a hyena-run catering company operating out of a creepy black lorry, which drives through the forest like death's own hearse. Since Red isn't home, the sow tries to get her pets into the hyena's claws. Although the 3 little piglets mount an offense, it proves to no avail, and the poor prey animals are carted off. You see, Grandma is already dead, as per this news report.
That occurred here, at Grandma's cottage, nearly 2 weeks ago. It is now clear that Grandma Hood was an extremely wealthy woman who left a substantial fortune behind her.
And a mysterious limousine with a mysterious rider doesn't seem to be broken up about it. Check out the members of the press, a cat and a she-wolf. We spend the next several minutes following around weird tiny Ian Holm having the trip of a lifetime, set to music by Paul Patterson, who scored a few episodes of the fabulous Hammer House of Horror series. You could get lost in this soundtrack. That is none other than the London Philharmonic Orchestra playing with conductor Franz Welzer Most. Ian seems frightened of something else in the woods.
A wolf. And there's nothing a wolf likes more than cruising through the dark undergrowth, dreaming, imagining, fantasizing about one thing. food.
This stud on the black motorcycle, decked out in leather with a little piggy riding in the sidecar, is the real Big Bad Wolf, but he's a little busy to be bogged down in a Red Riding Hood story, so he rides off. Check out the Berg noise. Any 1998 PC gamers out there? This leaves us with our protagonist? Antagonist?
There are wolves. And there are wolves. Most wolves are pretty cool customers.
It's true, we are. This is Wolfie, a pudgy,
Lazy, inept,
maladroit
mangy, pot-bellied, and rather bored.
half-wit with a fantastically designed suit. Look how those lips move. While Wolfie was voiced by Danny DeVito, his movements were done by Peter Elliott, known on IMDb as, quote, the film industry's primary primate, for his roles in ape-related films as far back as the 80s and as recently as Max's Lucy biopic. Everything up until the limousine was the present. With Wolfie's introduction, we are firmly in the past, and we get to see how Little Red Riding Hood used to play with her pretty little pets. She does little dances with them, chases them around, and puts leashes on them. There's something deeply psychosexual about all this. There's an interposition of eating, power, and lust, and you'll see a clearer example of that soon. I really like how they're all jumping to try and get this gingerbread cookie. Instead of expertly tracking his prey during a frightening thunderstorm, Wolfie gets a little lost and ends up helplessly rolling around until he crawls out of a leaf pile hungrier than ever.
His fertile mind began to play with all the choices of the day.
Old Wolfie doesn't seem too enthused by sheep and cows,
Another sheep?
who each represent their own problem. I wouldn't want to get my teeth tangled in all that wool either. The piglets are loathsome little troublemakers and are very creepy to me because of how their long, pink, human limbs easily match the pink flesh of their piggy faces. Ugh. Wolfie ponders sow, but the only sow around is this matronly old battle-axe stomping with a whip and a picklehaube. Even though she falls prone with her vulnerable throat exposed right there in front of them, Wolfie is more interested in the little house of thatch and clay. And we enter his mind in a dream sequence which borders on erotic.
It might be sort of fun to eat a new and different kind of meat.
Grandma's house turns into a fine restaurant complete with neon sign, and Wolfie enters dressed to the nines, immediately attended to by a cat and a hyena waiter and this pretty she-wolf waitress. I'd like to take a moment to note that the she-wolf is played by dancer and choreographer Scott Ambler. For some reason, knowing a man is playing the she-wolf makes this film all the more fantastical. After all, why not? Why shouldn't a male dancer play the leggy she-wolf? She seems to have a crush on Wolfie, and even lets him get a butt slap in. With some nice champagne, Wolfie puts his feet up and the she-wolf delicately robes his throat with a white bib. The hyena heaves up a massive cloche and all the animals lean in to see what decadent dish has been prepared. Why, it's... Granny's head. And what a granny, played by the same actress as Little Red, Sophie Bescher. Granny's decapitated kissy face really seals this dream sequence as something more than just comedy. There's a note of licentiousness throughout this film, played for laughs no doubt, but there nonetheless. Unfortunately for Wolfie, the real Granny is hard living and hard drinking.
Not a single drop left.
I love that Danny DeVito doesn't even have that much dialogue in this movie. Mostly, he's just making noises while Wolfie plods around and gets into trouble. And the orchestration comes into play, serving as the doorbell and carrying the mood.
Who is it?
The meter man come to read a meter.
Oh, that old trick. Wolfie is thinking of a plan and eventually happens upon one so good it drives him to do jumping jacks. And then off he goes. When he finally gets in, Granny breaks the fourth wall.
He's gonna eat me up.
After an altercation, Wolfie hops back into his dream to see it spoiled by Granny's cackling visage. Nonetheless, he eats her and comes out gnawing a bone and, nursing some dyspepsia.
Yeah.
Ian loves it. Since Wolfie's still hungry, he decides to wait for Little Red. His plan is to...
Turn her into red ice cream.
He pokes around Granny's house looking for something fetching and feminine to flatter his figure. He's quite picky, but settles on the classic cloak and bonnet. Not only is Little Red on her way, she's bringing her pretty pets with her. She leaves them in the care of the sheep and sow and cow, and is almost taken away by this slick cigar hyena. Little Red wasn't born yesterday. She knows how Grandma looks.
But Grandma, you look sort of funny. Sort of furry, I think.
Furry?
Outed.
Wolfie sat watching her and smiled. He thought,
Oh, I'm gonna eat this child.
You may have noticed by now that this entire film is delivered in verses from the Roald Dahl book, which is a remarkable commitment. It gives the film this sort of mysterious, lyrical feeling that it came from a furrow in the earth where dreams bleed out and maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't be seeing it.
Why, Grandma, what are you wearing under your dressing gown?
For our finish, we of course get a spin on the old eating a child routine.
the small girl smiles. One eyelid flickers. She whips a pistol from her knickers. She aims it at the creature's head and... she shoots him. Dead.
Kissing the smoke from her pistol, she gleefully watches the wolf die. No effort is made to cut Granny out of his belly, but in fact, the fur... We go back to the present. Red's limo lumbers through the woods like an elephant. The press is waiting for our star to sashay from her luxury car. She's earned a change through all her moxie, and now she's looking pretty foxy. She turns to her hyena beau with tickles and kisses before we go. But wait a minute. Is he the one who earlier gave Red the gun? Could it be that all this time a silent figure allowed the crime? Thus ends this fine film, a forgotten and fairly furry farce. A little darker than the rest, but that makes it one of the best. It boasts this fascinating mix of 18th century attire with modern technology in a way that keeps the old fairy tale feeling fresh. It's my estimation that quite a few of my viewers have seen the BAFTA-winning Revolting Rhymes from 2016 by Magic Light Pictures, which reinvents some of the stories from the book and spins them together. It's interesting comparing modern CGI animation to old TV films leaning heavily into mesmerizing practical effects. I dare say the use of so many real suits makes this as dark and queer as, say, Neil Jordan's 1984 film The Company of Wolves, which is an adaptation of stories from Angela Carter's anthology The Bloody Chamber. Now that I've managed to work in a mention of my favorite author and book, go ahead and take a look at the cover for the 1979 first edition. I'll wait. Going back to all the animal costumes, they remind me of another famed British production, the 1971 ballet adaptation of The Tales of Beatrix Potter. For those of you who aren't aware, Beatrix Potter was a mycologist whose furry vor stories were first published in 1902. Practically all of them involved the realities of predator-prey interactions in the English countryside where she lived. The ballet was created and choreographed by Frederick Ashton, who played Mrs. Tiggywinkle, with costumes by Christine Edzard, who was nominated for a BAFTA for her costume design. And wow, what incredible designs, right? Especially that Mr. Todd. Frederick Ashton is referred to as the, quote, founding father of British ballet, with a career beginning in 1931. And it gets better. Frederick also choreographed Powell and Pressburger's 1951 visual stunner The Tales of Hoffmann, which happens to be an adaptation of my favorite opera. Wow, I'm really hitting all the notes I wanted to in this video. This episode sort of turned into a broad treatise on culture as it pertains to stage and film production. Indeed, Little Red Riding Hood comes off like you're watching it on a stage in a dark theater. There are so many connections between stories out there in the world to find, and if you're curious, you'll be swimming in furry masterpieces before you know it. That's the great thing about this beast we call the furry fandom. It is born out of the endeavors of all sorts of people in all sorts of places creating all sorts of works, which just so happen to involve the animals with whom we share the planet. Nowadays, furries have the luxurious curse of being self-aware, but I'm willing to bet there were countless people fascinated, charmed, and maybe a little titillated by anthropomorphic animals well before we had a word to call ourselves. Once again, I'd like to thank my $5 Laserdisc Patreon supporters who enjoy fame and clout each time I say their name. Bragging rights! Joe the English Otter, Silly Scotty Dog, Kooky Trails, Plexel, Manji, Stubadub, Crown, Norman Whitetail, Goddledreary, and Mirja. If you join my Patreon at any tier, you'll get the episode uploaded completely ad-free on the Patreon hub. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you next time.